And welcome into another episode of Tiger Territory, part of the Foul Territory Network, a Detroit Tigers podcast. I'm Kieran Steckley. With me, as always, is a man who was kind of known as a bracket buster back in the day. He is Cody Stavenhagen. How you doing?
Hey, not totally sure what that means, but roster projections, bracket, kind of the same thing in that like there might be a couple upsets, you might be totally wrong on something. Sometimes picking the chaos option might end up being the best thing. We're here in the final days of spring training, and there are a couple big and arguably very hard decisions left.
So yeah, normally when I pick my bracket, I try to think most of this time this is chalk, so I don't try to go for the big upsets. And if I would have, and we did do that kind of with this roster projection when we a couple weeks ago. And I don't know if you can really call a lot of stuff chalk. You have Parker hurt, you have Vierling hurt, Jace Jung has already been sent down. The Mize situation continues to develop. Torque is playing in the outfield. You got people, Javier Baez playing third base. There ain't nothing chalk about this, Cody. There is nothing chalk about this as we kind of slam toward the beginning of the regular season. And like you said, some tough decisions to be made. The first one, it was announced more or less right when we published our last episode. So I think that's where we should start. Jace Jung did not make this team. I almost feel like a hypocrite the way I'm going to phrase this here because it's like, oh, you're going back on your word, but new information, what else can you do? I was 100% down with if he was showing you something that bat has always been his key, give him some length here. The problem is he just didn't really show you a lot. And I'm a big believer, longtime listeners know this. I'm a big believer in read and listen to as much AJ Hinch as you can because he, in a respectful but frank way, is going to tell the truth, and the way that he talked about the Jay situation, it was pretty clear that it just wasn't going to work out right now. And that's always the most important thing, the right now part of it. And the numbers speak for themselves. We don't have to dive into them. He just did not look like he was grooving towards starting the season with the major league team, and more or less that's okay, and there's a lot fallout from there. But your reaction, Cody, to maybe the timing, because we could kind of see it, but the timing of the Young decision.
Yeah, in a way, am still surprised it happened so early, but AJ Hinch said once they make a decision, it's their policy to just kind of tell the player. The fact they did it so early, I think, tells you how out they were on Jace Jung, and we did foreshadow that in our last episode, but it came to fruition pretty quick, not even sitting around, oh, what if there's an injury or anything like that. Jace is out, and I can't really knock it. For as much as I believe in the upside of his bat, for as much as there's an argument that believing that upside is still the better way to go, you stick to your organizational philosophy of earmarking at bats for young players. He looked so lost, and it was getting worse. Really looked to me like a guy who just needs to find himself, the good old mental reset. I think it's important to remember, as you kind of pointed out, Jace Jung's career is not over. We could see this guy by the end of April. Who knows? In an ideal world, I think the Tigers would still like to see a lot of Jace Jung this year. At the same time, we've questioned a lot, what do the Tigers actually think of Jace Jung? And I've asked AJ Hinch, I've asked Scott Harris. The answers you get were always just lukewarm. They weren't, and sometimes you can tell when AJ's yeah, I don't like a guy. Like you said, he finds very subtle ways to drop hints. And there wasn't even that with Jace, but also just I never got the sense that they were fired up about him. And another core belief of mine is that teams tell you what you think with their actions. This was a pretty strong action. And maybe even the fact they're not just going to bank on the upside right away, let him grind through those struggles, kind of tells you they don't have all that much faith in Jace being a big-time contributor right now. That's kind of what the situation here is. Unfortunately, Plan A at third base was Alex Bregman. Plan B was Matt Vierling, Andy Ibanez, Zach McKinstry. Vierling's hurt. Plan C was Jace Jung. or Jace Jung was probably part of Plan B with Vierling, and Jace had an awful spring. So now you're looking at Andy Ibanez and Zach McKinstry platooning to begin the year at third base. It is very tough to be excited about that.
Well, I mean, tough to be excited about it. That's not the vibe I get from the fan base right now, Cody. There's a lot of, dare I say the P word? There's a lot of panic going around the fan base right now, and really, like, I'm a big believer in not diving that far into like the emotional element. It's a long season. The season hasn't even started yet. You know what I mean? But what you just laid out there is like the ingredients for a panic, right? And starting, you throw in Javier getting the reps at third base, and then like McKinstry. Let's not pretend like he's getting the cover off the ball in the spring. Yeah. So like there's an element of, I think it's fair to say, disappointment with how the hot corner has gone from at the end of last season to here we sit on March 18th. That's not even like a real criticism. I think there's not really any other way to describe it as such. And so, like, it's lend itself to some, like, if this was a political thing, we would call it a conspiracy theory. Like, all these things that people are kind of, like, wanting to do, if that makes sense, where it's like, well, could they do this? Could they do that? Like the Gleyber conversation, could he be a third baseman? Yeah. And I don't know. I've never talked to Gleyber. Obviously, I'm not talking to AJ and Scott and all that stuff about, like, whether that's, like, a possibility. I would wager that it is an understood fact that Gleyber is going to be a second baseman because he rejected talking to teams that wanted to look at him at third base, and I'm pretty sure the Yankees could have used him at third base at any time in the last 5 years, and that didn't happen. So I assume that's out the window. You could correct me if I'm wrong here. I guess never say never, but I assume that's a little bit out the window. And so the point is that the fan base is feeling desperate about the third base situation. I don't know if the team is. We'll see. Maybe tomorrow they'll trade for Nolan Arenado.
I don't think they're getting Nolan Arenado. I think that ship has sailed, at least for the time being. I don't think Gleyber Torres is going to start playing third base tomorrow or opening day or anything like that. I do kind of agree with the thought that, like, Gleyber's here on a one-year deal in part to build his value, right? He talked about wanting to get a big contract next year in free agency. He'd be more valuable in free agency, both this year, both next year, for the rest of his career if he can play more than one position, because we all know he's not a very good defensive second baseman. It might be in his best interest, not just the team's, his, to play third base. But that's not happening right now. That's just kind of the reality. And even that whole construction kind of is almost an overreaction to the fact Spencer Torkelson had a good spring training. If we would have told you in the offseason, hey, Spencer Torkelson's going to be your first baseman, people would have been up in arms. Now Tork hits 4 homers in the spring. It's like, oh, why is Gleyber not playing third? So I don't totally know how to feel about that. I think panic is a little bit strong here because the panic implies that Jace Jung is just, his career is over, and that Matt Vierling, we don't quite know the extent of his injury. We'll see what that timeline ends up looking like. But Matt Vierling's going to be back at some point in time, you would think. This might be a very short-term problem. Now, at the same time, yeah, Ibanez McKinstry, I'm not jazzed about. Winsel Perez playing at the center, I'm not jazzed about. You have 2 positions that are pretty glaring weaknesses right now to begin the season, a year in which you want to win the division, make it back to the playoffs. Even as good of a spring as Spencer Torkelson had, like, he now is maybe going to take on a little bigger role. This guy who you sent down twice. There's some real concerns about this lineup, but I'm also, other than the whole Bregman thing, which I'm too exhausted to fully relitigate, like, what was the solution? And I'm not totally sure. I don't think it was Anthony Santander. I think we all agreed that he was not actually a good fit for this roster. Maybe if you could have got him on a short-term deal. He signed a 5-year deal with the Blue Jays. Do you want Anthony Santander for 5 years? I honestly don't. Love Ha-Sung Kim. If the Tigers had signed him, he would be on the injured list right now, so he wouldn't help you just yet. And I think as we've learned a little more, I'm not sure Ha-Seong Kim had that much interest in spending kind of a pillow deal year in Comerica Park. We've seen how George M. Steinbrenner Field played. Ha-Seong Kim might think he's going to make a little more money if he goes there and jacks some balls over the very short fences. So it's a bigger, complicated discussion, and I'm worried about the Tigers' offense. I've been worried about the Tigers' offense all along, but I'm not entirely sure what the solution is at this point. I think you got to hope Jace Jung makes his way back and that Matt Vierling gets healthy, and then maybe your concerns become eased a little bit.
Yeah, and another, and I don't even want to make this like another like tangent here, but just like another talking point is that like there's a little bit of a philosophical possibility of pivot with the Young situation, and the fact that like, you know, why is he not getting some of the run? Well, it's because the stakes are a little bit higher. You see what I'm saying? So like you have to kind of ride that line a little bit when you're coming off a playoff appearance and you are and you are aiming to win the division. And again, the Bregman thing, it was like a real push to get Bregman. So again, not a huge tangent there, but I do think it is one of the things to kind of monitor moving forward to see how Scott Harris, you know, his philosophy like ever evolves based on the state of the team. Just something I'm looking out for. We don't have to talk too much about.
Well, and Kieran, this is like an educated guess and inference, but if I had to guess right now who Scott Harris thinks will get the majority of at bats at third base in the second half of the season, I might say Howie Lee. And I know I came away at the end of spring not actually all that impressed with Lee at the plate, but the Tigers still really like this guy, and I think that plays into their kind of mid-interest level in Jace Jung. Don't forget Howie Lee could enter this equation if he performs well in AAA.
Yeah, and probably one of those, you know, two guys to monitor pretty sharply in Toledo, both kind of reps wise and just, you know, general.
And we're not going to do this McGonigal thing either. McGonigal's a great prospect. I know I raised some questions about him in our last episode, but like he's a great prospect. He's a great get for the Tigers. He's probably going to start the year in high A. All right, he's got a long way to go here.
Kevin McGonigal, what did I text you, Cody? He hit like 214 and like a handful of games in West Michigan last year.
Season ended prematurely with an injury.
He's gonna, like, I believe in him, but you know, you have to kind of take that in consideration is what I would say there. All right. Well, that wasn't like the most like sunny start to the podcast, Cody. Maybe this is sunny, maybe it's not. I don't know. I don't know what you're gonna say here, but you are back in Florida, as everybody knows, and we didn't do this on Sunday. So I think now, as the season is progressed, you know, getting really, really close here, about a week, what would be the vibes of Tigers camp right now, as you know the numbers start dwindling and the season is on the horizon, to keep the sun analogy?
Yeah, I actually think the vibes internally are still really high. That's the one thing we talked about. Like we don't get as critical as we did back in the day. Even though I don't know if it's critical, but we just kind of discussed the various layers of concern with the team. I think these guys in their clubhouse are pretty fired up. I think there's going to be a positive takeaway coming out of spring training, largely because this team can pitch. I mean, it has been a pretty great spring on the pitching front. The majority of guys have performed well. They're coming out of spring healthy pitching-wise. Casey Mize takes a big step forward. Even the much maligned Kenta Maeda has done some nice things this spring. I don't know if they can replicate last year's success. We talked about how it was a little bit of a historical anomaly, but the Tigers are going to have a top 10, maybe top 5 pitching staff again. I'm not sure there's much doubt in my mind, provided their top guys maintain health at least. These guys can throw the ball, and that might give them a chance to live with some of these early season concerns at third, at center, really the entire lineup. I think the pitching is the main reason people around this camp are still really optimistic.
And look, when you got Scooble there frontlining it, it's hard to not have that belief. And you have guys. I mean, there was basically the car wash went on the General Foul Territory show with a lot of the faces of the organization, and that was fun to see. And you do kind of, I mean, get that kind of positive vibe there. And you see like, Scooble, he's everywhere. He's been a great ambassador for the Tigers. But you see like Riley Green and Gary Carpenter and these guys, and it's like, well, it's hard to be that gloomy when you got Scooble, you got Green, and then the Gary Carpenter, who, like, we are so guilty just because there's not that much interesting to say. But we are really guilty of just kind of not doing a lot of Carpenter stuff this spring training, which, and by the way, not like I'm seeing a lot of other people talk about Carpenter either, which probably means like if he starts out the season on a tear, he's going to be like the number one focus. And you could argue, given these injuries and all that stuff, that, his bat is going to be as crucial as ever to start the season. Speaking of the outfield, though, we finally saw Spencer Torkelson. We talked about it on Sunday, Cody. We finally saw Spencer Torkelson in the outfield. Not a whole lot to scout, I would say, but you did write about it. You said you were going to talk to him, and you did talk about it. It's on The Athletic. You can read it if you're a subscriber. I'm curious how Spencer Torkelson, like your read of him doing this, because one of the criticisms of Torkelson is that, kind of reading between the lines, like it wasn't like he was that open, is I think a safe way to say about like some of the people will call it stubbornness in the plate and like all that stuff with some of the things. So like, I'm trying to be like as PC and as accurate as I can there. That was one of the things that you kind of read in between the lines with Torque, and then he basically gets his job taken away from him, and he has a good spring, as we talked about. And now this is a former 1-1 who was drafted as a third baseman, who's played his entire major league career at first base, and like now the outfield might be his avenue. So I'm just kind of curious how like the Torque vibe is, and then just anything observational you can say about like seeing him. I'm sure it was kind of weird to see Torque in right field, but what can you kind of share with us?
Yeah, I mean, he said he's 1,000% on board with playing outfield, and I believe him. I think he'd much rather spend a few innings in right field than a few months in AAA Toledo, right? And he's done it before, as we've talked about. Didn't get to see him chase a pop fly in his first taste of action. We did even see some early, maybe some growing pains, bobbled a single a little bit, didn't cost the Tigers anything. It did seem, for as much as I've always thought like he kind of should play out there, it was funny seeing him run out to the outfield, and it did just look strange. A weird play where he threw to third, allowed a runner to take second. AJ Hinch said he didn't have a problem with the decision, but the throw to third was not good. I know he's been ugly chasing pop flies before, but I think with some practice, which again, the Tigers didn't give him any practice, but I think with some practice, maybe he could be, he could be as good as Jahan at least, right? Jahan's not a very good outfielder. I think he'd do that. I'm actually worried about his arm. I think all the time of an old interview I had with Tom Holliday, who coached him in Cape Cod, talked a lot about the arm and teaching Torkelson to throw like an outfielder. Think about it. Have you ever seen Torkelson make a long throw overhead? I haven't.
No.
Slings the ball from a three-quarter spot like an infielder because he's an infielder. But even at third, he had a similar throwing motion. The one time we've seen him make a throw from right field, it wasn't very good. I think that may be a little bit of a concern with him. But we might see a lot more of it. We might not. I think it's less dependent on the glove and more dependent on the bat. If Torkelson is hitting, AJ Hinch is going to find ways to get him in this lineup. Again, I have him on my latest roster projection. I think just the sheer ability to play right field, pinch hit for Kerry Carpenter late in the game, whatever it might be, takes him from off the team to on the team. And if he happens to be hitting the ball, maybe this becomes more than just a sprinkle in.
Yeah. And look, we started this podcast talking about like the not so great situations in a couple positions. That's due in large part to not just defensively, but offensively. And right now, can you afford, if you're the Tigers, to, not utilize your bat assets as best you can? I would probably wager no, but we'll see what they decide. and we're going to continue this roster projection. It's going to be like a round robin, back and forth, like kind of like a basketball game. We'll try to stay as coherent as possible. But first, we're going to hear a word from our sponsors.
FT fam, I hope you have as much confidence as Penelope right now, who is an avid Spot and Tango fan, okay? And she uses the code FOUL, Kratz, because this is a personalized dog food subscription service that prevents you, of course, from going to the store to pick up the food, and she just gets the highest quality unkibble. That is what they're known for. And I know you love the quiz part of it, too.
It's a super quick quiz, but it lets you give them the information and they tailor it to what is needed based on their age, size, activity level, all things that are custom for each and every one of your dogs.
Yeah, human grade ingredients in that unkibble, USDA meat, fruits, and veggies that are approved there. No artificial stuff, no preservatives. They've got the exclusive deal for the FT fam for a limited time. Go to spotandtango.com/foul. Use code FOUL to get 50% off your first order. That's spotandtango.com/foul. It's spotandtango.com/foul, code foul.
It's about time we had a pet food ad, seeing as both of our animals have made several appearances on this podcast, and my wife is a veterinarian. So, Spot and Tango, code FOUL there. So, there you go.
The best ad in the history of this podcast right there.
That is true. That is true. Maybe we'll have to get in on that as well. All right. Now that we have talked about some of the things that are wrong or different, let's kind of go back to some usual stuff here, Cody. So this obviously publishes Wednesday morning. Wednesday, just afternoon, we will see Casey Mize for the final time in the Grapefruit League setting over there against the Red Sox. And here's what I hope happens. I hope he does like something similar to what he's done all spring, so the decision just like doesn't become the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812, where it's like everyone associates, like he doesn't make the squad, he has a bad thing outing against the Red Sox, and then all of a sudden everyone associates it with one outing, which is obviously would be inaccurate, but it would just like lead to general association. And Jackson Jobe is a guy that if you just want to like do a hype meter has we've talked about it a little bit, but it has kind of come down just a tad. Not making a proclamation of anything, but it is of note as the kind of rotation comes into focus. I will make note that Dan Dickerson on his personal starting rotation, he has Mize and Jobe in there, and I think I take Dan's baseball opinions very seriously. So I just wanted to make note of that.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put them both in there. Jobe did make his last outing on the Lakeland backfield instead of the game against the Twins in Fort Myers. I think part of that was they didn't want to take him on a very long bus trip, and they wanted to make sure he was able to get that outing in if that game got banged or something, and the Tigers are 2.5 hours plus from Lakeland. It would be a little bit of a problem. So I don't know the full story there, but I don't think it's anything. I don't think it's a big deal. Casey Mize has earned this, man. He's been so good all spring. I mean, there is a world where the Tigers could leave Maeda, as I've said, in the rotation, but I think that's going to be hard to justify. And even though that would allow the Tigers to do more with their bullpen, you get Brenan Hanifee, who we'll talk about more on a second one there for sure. The Tigers, you probably also, at the end of the day, feel more comfortable with Maeda in more of a protected role. So the bullpen where you can pick and choose a spot for him, I don't think they're going to totally shy away from him. I think they think the splitter could be good against the right pocket in a lineup. Could give you multiple innings if you needed to. This just seems to make the most sense, though, right? Like, you're really going to look Casey Mize in the eye and tell him he's going down? Maybe they could, but man, that'd be tough. And Jobe, he still has some things to work on. That's become more apparent, but dude, he's so good, and we've talked at length about the prospect promotion thing. I think this guy's got to be on your opening day roster. I mean, if you at all believe he is talented enough to win Rookie of the Year, you can't keep him in Toledo, in my opinion. I would have them both on my roster projection. I think these pitching decisions, though, are so hard because there's a couple guys you're just trying to get on there. The Maeda thing does kind of weigh you down, but you have to keep him on the roster, or at least the Tigers are, I assure you, going to keep him on the roster. It's really tough. I'm glad I'm not the guy who has to make the final decision on who's like the last man in the bullpen. But if I were making this decision, I would have Jackson Jobe and Casey Mize both in the rotation.
Yeah, I'm 100% confident with that. I believe that to be like the best allocation of resources. Like that's kind of what I've kind of come down to. I try to keep it simple, and when I'm forming my opinions, and it just seems like that's the best use. And Maeda, I'm glad you mentioned Maeda out of the pen being like an asset that they like believe in, because there's no reason, based on like what we've seen in spring, that you can't utilize him in a beneficial way, not just like some innings eater or whatever. Like, I think there's a very real world where he is a valuable guy in the pen, and then like, you know, we know arm injuries are going to happen. Like there's a guy right there. You see what I'm saying, that you can work with. So in my opinion, that's the best way to go. I'm a big believer in, if guys earn the job, like they should get the job. You know what I mean? Like we started this podcast talking about Young. He didn't earn it. You know, and why didn't he earn it? You know, partially because of what he performed on the field in these games. And Mize, to this point, had pretty much no matter what happens on Wednesday, he would have quote unquote earned it. But the Hanifee thing is interesting, Cody. Like not to be mentioned, not to go without mentioning, I should say. This is a guy who has appeared in 6 games. He's got a little bit more than 7 innings in the spring. Only 4 hits. You know, like the guy looks good. There's no doubt about it. And this is one that you always bring up. You're really in on Hanifee.
I mean, Kieran, Hanifee had a sub-2 ERA down the stretch for the Tigers last year. He's been even better this spring. I mean, his stuff has been on a whole new level. Who in the Tigers bullpen has been more impressive than Brenan Hanifee this spring? My answer to that question is nobody. And so how do you get this guy on the roster? If we just go through Will Vest, Bo Brisky, Tyler Holton, in theory, let's see, you signed Canely, you signed Brebbia, you have Jason Foley, Kenta Maeda right now we're putting in the pin. That leaves 1 spot. So does that go to Hanifee? He's earned it. He has not allowed a single run all spring. If you do that, you have 1 left-handed pitcher in the bullpen, and it's Tyler Holton, who, for what it's worth, you don't really use as like a situational lefty all that much. You use him in a million different ways. So that's a little bit of a risky construction, I think. Now, it's worth noting the Tigers have a lot of dudes who can get out left-handed hitters. So how much do they value? Still, certain guys just struggle with that arm slot coming at them from the left side. And also, it's important to think switch hitters. Dodgers have Tommy Edman, the Mariners, JP Crawford. The Mariners have a couple switch hitters. You might need a second lefty just to turn a guy around in a pinch. I think that's certainly worth considering, and that's why I'm really torn on this. My projection on The Athletic, I put Brant Herter on there. Herter, his command's not been good this spring, but it's been better the last 2 outings. The Tigers love him and believe in him. And he offers you length, so you could use him as a situational lefty. You could use him in a multi-inning role. You could open a game with him. That still makes a lot of sense. Andrew Chafin remains in this mix. He's still throwing so slow that StatCast is registering some of his four-seam fastballs as changeups, but he topped 91. He had, I think, 91.4, 91.7. His last outing was better. Not only was the velocity up, just the command, the stuff overall seemed to be an improvement. He's going to get in the big leagues, but I think it would be easy to say, Chafe, go give me 2 good weeks in Toledo. Let's make sure you're 100% there. We don't want to rush this. And so that would leave the option Sean Gunther, who didn't have a very good camp. That leaves Hanifee. And one thing no one's talking about that would solve this dilemma, Kieran. You know who has not had a good spring? Jason Foley. Yeah. I don't know that the Tigers are going to option Jason Foley, but if I were running the team, that might be my move. They didn't use him in the ALDS. AJ Hinch was actively staying away from him. And not only is his ERA bad this spring, the stuff just hasn't been there. The velo was way down, and I think his most recent outing, in a way, he's one of your most proven relievers. That'd be kind of a bold move. But who's had the better, like, not just results-wise, who has looked better this spring? Who do you want to put in against the LA Dodgers right now? I'd take Hanifee. And again, just tell Foley, hey, man, we believe in you. You're a great pitcher. We just need you to go get right real quick. That's going to be really interesting because someone is going to get told they're not on the team who deserves to be on the team. That could be Mize, that could be Hanifee, that could be Foley, that could be Herder, Chase. Like, there are going to be some hard conversations. We're not even mentioning Cater Montero, who's had a great spring. I think he's pretty much locked to be like that dude in Toledo who's maybe the rain delay guy. Like, we're going to see him, but it makes sense for him to go to AAA. Hanifee's the one that's like keeping me up right now. And I'm like, he kind of has to be on this bullpen. The only real way I see it working is if you option Foley, and I'm not sure I see the Tigers actually optioning Jason Foley.
What I'll say about Foley right now is that the ingredients to give the Tigers an out in this decision is 100% there with how he's looked this spring. And because no one's talking about it, I'm just going to read the stats real quick, Cody, so people have an idea in case this does go down. He's got an 8.44 ERA. That's in, just over 5 innings. He's given up 8 hits, a home run. He does have 8 strikeouts. So, for whatever that's worth.
It's worth considering.
But it hasn't looked good either, as you pointed out with the velocity. So it's one of those things that, if you're going for the tough decisions, there's the ingredients that lends itself to that area. So we'll have to see. We'll have to monitor that. But before we get to a couple quick hitter stuff, Cody. Speaking of rain out guy, we saw Matt Manning today. It just kind of feels like it's coming, at least to a metaphorical kind of crash and burn. It's not a lot of good things coming out of his outings, and if they're, as I've said before, it just feels like everybody's just kind of passed him by a little bit, and I feel bad saying that, but I don't know how else to describe that. We just gave 20 pitchers a mention here, and he wasn't one of them, and he pitched today.
Yeah, I mean, we know he was optioned what feels like a long time ago now. Didn't have a good camp. And before his outing here against the Twins, I was like, he's either going to shove because he's mad or he's going to be terrible because he's just kind of down in the dumps. He was low-key pretty terrible. The fastball velo was not there at all. Wasn't locating early and got away with it. And by his 4th inning, he was getting beat around the yard a little bit. It's become kind of sad. I've always had a lot of questions about Matt Manning's development, not necessarily had the most belief in him, even though we always talked about his potential. We've talked about him almost as much as any player. I just never saw it clicking. I never saw a third pitch. And now it's like, is this the end? I mean, there was a part of me that walked out of the park Tuesday and was like, might be the last time we see Matt Manning throw. If they make a waiver claim or something next week, could they DFA him? I've called a long time, said it would make sense to move him to the pen. I understand the Tigers don't necessarily want to do that with guys until they have to. It makes more sense to keep them stretched out as starters if you need to, blah, blah, blah. But at this point, he ain't first up to go to the big leagues. I don't think he's second up to go to the big leagues. I think if you want to get any value out of him, it might be time to move this guy to the pen. Again, doesn't seem like that's in the plan still, but I'm like, he's not new to this, all right? And nothing has quite worked. I think his time in the organization could be coming to an end. And like I said, it's almost just sad that a guy that talented, it happens in baseball all the time. But this is a really talented guy, and it's just never clicked. And now it's getting ugly.
Tough sport. Tough sport. That's what I'll say about that. All right. Some hitter stuff here, Cody. You mentioned Jahan a little bit. The guy continues to hit. What I talked about earlier about simple allocation of resources, I've said it before. It's just hard for me to envision Jay-hen not being like a valuable bat, not just on the roster, but a valuable bat. Again, the defensive versatility. Are we feeling pretty safe there? Or?
I mean, yeah, let's look at the AJ Hinch quote from Tuesday, something to the effect of, I've been impressed with his consistency at the plate. I think we all feel like every time he comes up, he's going to give you a good at bat. Does that sound like someone AJ Hinch wants on the roster, Kieran?
Sounds like someone that he could like.
That checks a lot of criteria for a team that needs bats, right-handed bats especially. Jay Hin's had a great camp. Hasn't necessarily been flashy, but it's been incredibly steady. He gives you a good at bat every time out. We know there's some defensive limitations, but man, I think he's earned a spot again. I now think there's room for both him and Torque on the roster. If I had to pick one of them, I'm still picking Jay-hen. But you're going into the regular season feeling optimistic about both of those guys. There's still a little bit duplicates. I'll be interested to see how that plays out. But yeah, I think Jay-hen's stock is on the rise. I've said that before. I'm really interested to see what he could do for the Tigers this year.
So how many spots are in your mind like available then?
Position players?
Yeah.
I think we're at 0.
Yeah.
My guy, Jahmai Jones, I think the Torque move to outfield might push him off. He's the one guy, had a great camp, deserves it in a way. But he's not on the 40-man, so that would require a 40-man move. Another thing to think about, if Meadows or Veerling, if one of those guys is back in 2 weeks, you can't option Jones. He's out of options. You'd have to DFA him and then risk losing him. That's a weird conversation because in a way you get a guy like that just for this situation where you have 2 outfielders injured. But unless you know one of those is going to be a longer-term thing, I'm not sure you want to call him up for 10 days, 2 weeks, and then risk losing them. And also the performance of Torkelson and Jay-hen has kind of made that a harder decision. Kreidler's still in the mix. They haven't sent him down. The defensive versatility is a big reason for that, but he's, again, not hit. I think he's just there, kind of break glass in case of emergency. I could be wrong, but I think it's Torque, it's Jay-hen. I think Sweeney is on the roster, especially with Jace being off the roster. I feel pretty good in the 13 position players I have on my roster projection.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, these guys.
With the caveat, they could still claim someone. They could certainly still go get someone else.
And, real quick, yeah, we've obviously gone long here, and that's okay. A lot of fun discussions, but they're still very vague on the timetables with Parker and Veerling, but they're not throwing, so it's safe to say that not necessarily that close, I think is a good way to put it. Hopefully, the rehab progressions and daily activities or whatever,
I did see Parker Meadows running. His right arm was moving. It's still attached to his body, and it is moving. So for whatever that is worth.
So we'll see. And then once they actually do start, doing actual baseball activities, what kind of ramp up period, I'll be very curious to see how the Tigers handle both those situations. And of course, it'll just depend on when they get healthy. So, all right, Cody, anything else before we jet out of here?
No, we covered a lot. We got some meaty podcasts these days, which means the regular season is about to be here.
Yeah, went by in a flash. All right, you can follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Cody Stavenhagen. I'm at Kieran_Steckley. Pod page at Tiger Territory _ Apple, Spotify. Subscribe, 5-star review if you feel so inclined. YouTube, Instagram. Follow us and subscribe to us there. So for Cody Stavenhagen, I'm Kieran Steckley. Everybody have a great day.